welcome to Sociology. It's really my pleasure to be able to welcome all of you here to the Sociology Department. And on behalf of the Resource Center for Public Sociology, I'm the outgoing director for that Resource Center. And we're really glad to be able to welcome you here to Sociology. Welcome from Ghana. I know you're probably still a little jet lagged, but we are happy to receive you here. And thank you so much to Professor Mensah for your leadership in this particular project and in our collaborations. And, you know, this is not the first time you've done stuff with the RCPS, so you are always welcome to the RCPS. Now, as custom demands, we are in sociology, and the head of sociology should be the one to welcome us to his house, as it were. And so it is my pleasure to introduce you to the chair of our sociology department, Professor Mark Thomas, who will do the land acknowledgement and welcome us properly to the department and to you.
Thank you, Sylvia. I'm going to stand just so those online can see and hear me as well. So on behalf of the Department of Sociology, I welcome you to this seminar on socioeconomic and health vulnerabilities of women in the context of COVID-19, the experience of female bushmeat traders in Ghana. I want to thank Dr. Sylvia Bawa for inviting me to provide some opening remarks. And so I'm going to begin with a land acknowledgement. As members of the York University community, we recognize that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships with the territories upon which York University campuses are located that precede the establishment of York University. We acknowledge our presence on the traditional territory of many Indigenous nations. The area known as Tagaronto has been caretaken by the Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat. It is now home to many First Nation, Inuit, and Métis communities. We acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. This territory is subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant and agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. So today's event is organized by Dr. Joseph Mensah and Dr. Sylvia Bawa. And I feel it wouldn't be a proper welcome if I didn't tell you how great our organizers are. So I'm going to just take a moment to introduce them to you. So Dr. Joseph Mensah is a professor of geography at York University. He has served as chair of the Department of Geography and has also been deputy director of the Harriet Tubman Institute for Research on Global Migrations of African Peoples. He is founding member of the University of Ghana Pan-African Doctoral Academy and recipient of the Council for the Development of Social Science Research in Africa's inaugural Diaspora Visiting Professor Fellowship at the University of Ghana. Professor Mensah's research has been published in journals such as Health Economics, Higher Education, Studies in Political Economy, Housing Studies, Canadian Geographer, and Social Identities. Dr. Sylvia Bawa is an associate professor in the Department of Sociology here at York and is director outgoing, as Sylvia mentioned, of York's Resource Center for Public Sociology. Dr. Bawa's research focuses on globalization, human rights, gender and development, post-colonial feminisms, and critical development theory. And Dr. Bawa has been published in journals including Asian and African Studies, African Identities, Canadian Journal of African Studies, and Third World Quarterly. Now, today's event is hosted by the Resource Center for Public Sociology. The RCPS, as it's known, supports York faculty members and students engaging in teaching and research in public sociology and links the university with local, national, and global communities. Today's presentation, as part of the Women Rise initiative, I think offers a really fantastic example of public sociology, and I'm looking forward to learning more about the research project. So thank you to all of you who are going to present today. I'll now turn things over to Dr. Mensah, who will take us into the presentation.
So good morning, everyone. I think I've introduced myself to everyone, but I'm Jennifer Social, and I'm the Associate Dean of Global and Community Engagement in the Faculty of Liberal Arts and Professional Studies. The Dean could not be here today. He is on campus, Joseph, and he said he's going to try to pop in. But he sends his regards and best wishes in case he's in for today's event. I welcome colleagues here, both who are joining us in person and those who are joining us remotely. Colleagues will recall a recent visit where the Dean traveled to Ghana with a delegation. And the goal of this visit was to visit a number of institutions and engage in fostering meaningful relationships. Ghana is not only a priority country for engagement in several ways, but in particular in collaborative teaching and learning and research enhancement. As such, we have started to engage with colleagues and form what we call regional research clusters as a way to bring together various researchers across our faculty, but also to address supports and synergies that will enable our researchers to develop and or enhance relationships with colleagues in Ghana and bring forth research that matters. Some colleagues will know that I have been involved in community consultations as I build an internationalization strategy for our faculty. The principles that define our faculty regarding social justice, equity, inclusion, diversity, and reciprocity will drive the framework of our global engagement strategy. Thank you, and I look forward to learning about your research project.
So thank you, and thank you very much for the opportunity to present our research to the team here in New York. And just as was mentioned earlier, the project is about the socioeconomic and health vulnerabilities of informal sector traders and during and after COVID-19 pandemic, the experiences of female bushmeat traders in Ghana. And quite a number of team members, so I'll just briefly take you through the team members. Our PI is Professor Yanti Amabedu, who is also the chair for the Center for Biodiversity Conservation Research. And then the co-PI is our own Professor Joseph Mensah, and New York University Faculty of Environmental and Urban Change. Then we also have one of the policymaker, Dr. Emmanuel Odami, who is a technical advisor and with the Ministry of Health and Ghana. And then my own self, Prof. Charlotte Wrigley-Asante, I'm from the Department of Geography and Resource Development, also a gender and development expert. We also have Dr. Fidelia Ohimin, who is from the Department of Sociology, University of Ghana. And then Professor Eric Tinkran, who is also at the Department of Sociology, Memorial University here in Canada. And Dr. Amponsa Mensah is a research fellow at the Center for Biodiversity Conservation Research. And then we have research coordinators as well as students and master students on the project. We have three master students. So it's quite a large team that have worked on this project for about 2 years now. So as a background to the study, generally in Ghana, research has shown that the majority of Ghanaian women trade informally. They've been trading for many, many years. And even before the onset of COVID-19, they already face serious socioeconomic and health challenges. Studies and my own studies that I've done in the past shows that lack of access to credit, to capital, to land, and to training, to information, and all of that are some of the key challenges that informal sector workers generally face, and particularly for women. And so with the emergence of COVID-19 pandemic, we all know how the pandemic impacted on us, and particularly for informal sector workers, it impacted negatively in many, many countries, particularly countries in the global south, as a result of restrictions and the lockdowns and so on and so forth. So a lot of people lost their jobs, livelihoods were affected. And studies have also shown that it impacted negatively on small businesses, and particularly businesses led by women, which mainly are small and micro businesses, especially in our African context. And so when you compare male and female businesses, studies show that it impacted more on female-led businesses as compared to male-led ones. because of already the existing challenges that many women traders, women in the informal sector and particularly traders also face. Most of their businesses are already fragile business. You can predict lack of state support, minimal insurance, and so on and so forth. So with the emergence of COVID, it really impacted on women's businesses in particular. The bushmeat industry in Ghana falls under the informal sector business and is gendered in the sense that we have men, the men are also involved in that business, but you find that, realize that men are more or predominantly hunters, while the women trade, either wholesale or retail or both. And this also includes women who use it to cook meals in our local restaurants that we call the chobats, where traditional bushmeat are served. So, we have a huge majority of women who trade or do that kind of business in the bushmeat industry. So a study by Ntiama Bredu, for instance, revealed that 85% of bushmeat traders in Ghana were female. The majority, there's no clear data on that, but the majority of women are found in that particular business. So with the onset of COVID-19 pandemic and its associated restrictions and land border closures and all of that, it really impacted on the business. Yet no clear knowledge or studies have been done on that, particularly also on the health hazards of this bushmeat trade, including women's exposure to the zoonotic diseases that are associated with this business. So that is one of the motivation for us to look at this study and how it impacted women's lives and livelihoods, as well as the health impacts. So we wanted to really look at how the COVID impacted on the socioeconomic lives of the women that we find that you find in this sector, because there's very limited knowledge on that. So what were the objectives that we set out to study? To first of all, to understand how the COVID-19 pandemic and then its interventions affected the women in the bushmeat trade, with emphasis on the gender dimensions of the physical and the mental health of these women. And also to identify the institutional structure and cultural dynamics that either foster or undermine women's effort to make a living during and after the COVID-19 pandemic. And as well as to look at the strategies. How did they cope in the event of COVID? What were the strategies that they used to overcome the COVID pandemic and also to sustain their livelihoods in particular, and to draw lessons to provide input into the Ghana's COVID-19 recovery program? So these were the objectives that guided the whole research. And as academics, we came up with certain frameworks, theoretical frameworks to guided us right from the beginning. Women have been looked at as in the context of vulnerability as well as empowerment. So we looked at these concepts, either whether they are disempowered or empowered versus vulnerability. These are some of the things concepts that guided us, because it also impacts on the livelihoods of women in terms of access to financial capital, social capital, physical capital, and sometimes even human capital. But at the same time, there's also the concept of agency and resilience. So we also looked at these are things that guided us in our work, that yes, they may be disempowered, but at the same time, there's some resilience in that. So we looked at all of these things and how it impacted on the livelihoods of women and then the women's lives themselves. So in terms of methodology and then the study sites, how did we go around that? Before we started the study, we selected 3 major markets, well-known markets for the bushmeat trade. One in the southern part of Ghana, Accra, which is in the capital, and that receives meat from other the southern coastal part of Ghana. Then the mid portion of Ghana, Kumasi, which is also the largest bushmeat. There's a popular market. There's the largest bushmeat market, and is located right in the heart of the central business district of Kumasi, which is the second largest city. And they trade mainly in fresh bushmeat, and they receive meat from a wide range of areas. Then the northern part of Ghana, Bupe, which is also the capital of the central Gonja district in the Savannah region, also a well-known market for bushmeat trade. So these were the study sites that we selected. But when we started our field work, we realized that we had to expand to other catchment areas. So we categorize our whole study into three major areas: the northern zone, the middle zone, and then the southern zone. So in the northern zone, we had to move into other areas well known for the bushmeat trade, just to expand our sample size and all of that. And so we went to places like Tichiman and Koranza and its surrounding areas. That represents the northern zone. Then the middle belt, we also had to move beyond Kumasi to other areas like Gosu and Sunyani and the central part of Ghana. And then the southern zone, we had to go to places like Mankasim, Sredro, Takoradi, and others. So we had three major catchment areas, and that covers our study sites. So we really roamed in Ghana, searching for bushmeat traders. And as we present our analysis, you understand why we had to expand. We kept on expanding because it's a factor that shows that the business is actually going down. So in terms of methodology, mixed methods approach, both qualitative and then quantitative. We conducted a survey, and in the end, we had about 217 women. In fact, we thought we could get over 400 women, but even after expanding and expanding and expanding, we're able to sample 217 women, bushmeat traders, including those who use it to prepare meals in our local restaurants. Then we conducted quite a number of in-depth interviews, and then focus group discussions with the women traders and some hunters. And then we've also done some ethnographic case studies. We are just about to complete that. And of course, we use direct observation. And before we finalize our instruments and we started data collection, we had ethical clearance from the University of Ghana Ethical Clearance Committee from the College of Humanities. So that's the methodology that we use. So findings, we have some preliminary findings that we want to share with you. We are still looking at the data and interrogating the data. So just background of our sample, the majority, about a third of them do not have any, this is the women. A third, about 33% don't have any education at all. And only 13% have some form of secondary education. Then in terms of marital status, about 45% are married. And then we also have those who are divorced and then single, and just 1.4% reported that they are cohabiting. The average age is about 50 years, and majority profess to be Christians. And then in terms of the type of bushmeat trader, 45% are wholesalers. And then we also have 51.6% who say they are retailers. Some are wholesalers and at the same time retailers. And some are also either only wholesalers or retailers, but you find the majority doing both. And then we also have about 21% who are choba operators, and others also are smokers. So what's the nature of the bushmeat business itself or trade? One clear thing that came out is that is an intergenerational kind of trade. They inherited from their mothers or grandmothers, and they have been in the business, for many, many years. Many reported that they've been in the business for over 10 years. In fact, some said over 50 years, been virtually all their lives. So they inherited the businesses from their mothers, who also in turn inherited from their mothers, and so on and so forth. And it has been a major, or it still is a major source of livelihood for several families for many, many years now. We also have men in the business as hunters, but the difference between the women and the men is that for the men is more or less a secondary type of business. For the women is their major economic activity. But men seem to have other businesses, but they do this as a secondary form of business. That's a clear difference that we found between the men and then the women in the bushmeat trade. Thank you very much. Then again, there's also a significant difference between the different markets that we surveyed. We realized that in Kumasi, the market, the name of the market is the one in the middle. Achimunum market is a major market popular for fresh bushmeat, and they seem to have a huge, huge volumes of bushmeat as compared to the other markets that we sampled. So there's clear intermarket and intra-market disparities in terms of the income levels, the amount of money that you need, and even the value of the bushmeat trade in the markets that we surveyed, particularly the three original markets that we surveyed. Achimunum has the highest value, and Dupe seem to have the lowest value. And that also impacts on the profit levels and the income and profit levels of these three markets. Generally, Achimunum seem to be the highest. In fact, in all the markets that we surveyed in Ghana, Achimunum seem to be the highest as compared to the other markets. And they seem to, the traders there seem to have very large, financial capital as compared to the other markets. And this also is very important, because if there's any intervention, we look at these differences and see who is most vulnerable, which categories of women are most vulnerable as compared to others, so that you can have very good interventions for these women. Now, we were clearly interested in the impact of the COVID-19. So one of the key questions that we asked them whether they are aware that there was COVID, and the source of information, and whether they think that it had a risk level, and so on and so forth. So clearly, I think almost 100% of the women said yes, they've heard of COVID, and most of them got the information from either the radio, the television, either family and friends, the church, and so on. So that was very good. I mean, for COVID, almost everybody was aware of that. But what we also found was that only 42% perceived that it was a high-risk kind of disease, which, well, relatively high. And then what also kind of surprised us was that 88% of them, women, had vaccinated against COVID, and because there was this whole perception that people were not vaccinating, so it really surprised us that 88% had gone for the vaccine, and some had 2 and even taken 3 vaccines just to protect themselves. Only 1% reported that they were hospitalized during the COVID time, and 5% said they knew someone who died of COVID-19 at that time. Then the impact on the livelihood is also what we were really interested in. Generally, there was a decline in the bushmeat trade, and the decline really started as way back as the Ebola pandemic. If you remember, there was Ebola pandemic in 2014, way before the COVID. So that really impacted the trade. But from what they told us, the COVID also worsened, or has worsened and the impact on the livelihood. Because Ebola came, people were scared. They completely stopped buying the bushmeat because they were scared that they would be infected. And then, you know, they tried to revive the trade, and then suddenly COVID also came to hit them, and that worsened the situation. These are some of the quotes that we got from the field. For instance, this woman said, if the Ebola really affected the business, people completely stopped buying the bushmeat because they were scared they might get infected if with Ebola if they take the bushmeat. So most of our customers stopped purchasing bushmeat due to the rumor that animals host infectious diseases. And as a result, one can easily be infected by consuming them. So this was very recurrent in almost all the markets, and the women that we interviewed, they came up with this story. And then the other, I'm so sorry, other aspect was that customers were also not allowed to visit the market because of the lockdown, because of closures and all of that. People were not allowed to go out, and that also impacted on the business. So the decline was attributed to the fear that bushmeat transmits zoonotic diseases. People were afraid to buy that because they think that they will contract the disease. And then also the lockdowns and the closure of markets. And another measure that authorities put in place was the rotational measures that, so back home during that time, I mean, if any of you have been to our local markets, it's a very congested, you know, populated place. So state authorities had to put in measures to streamline, you know, all of that. So the women were selling in tents. So they claimed they were given numbers. So if today 1 to 20, numbers 1 to 20 is your 10 for you to sell, then tomorrow is 21 to 40, just to make sure that they decongest the markets. And so instead of selling from Monday to Saturday, for instance, you can sell for just twice a week. And that also impacted on their businesses. A key thing that they also mentioned was stigmatization, of course, because people were afraid to even get close to these women because of the bushmeat that they were trading in. So people were scared to come close and even to buy and even to eat the meat. So these are some of the key factors that really impacted on the businesses. So in terms of how it affected the over 90% said it had a negative impact on their business. And of course, once people are not buying, 86% reported that it affected their purchases. So once these things are happening, automatically it's going to affect their income levels, their profits and profit margins, and then it will trickle down to the household level, because this is a major livelihood, they are major economic livelihood, and that sustains them at the household level. But we realize that other factors were also contributing to the decline of the trade, not only the Ebola or the COVID, but again, some of the issues that came up is the illegal mining activities, you know, that is happening in our part of the world, especially in Ghana. So many young men who hitherto were hunting for disease are no longer interested in that kind of activity. They prefer to do other alternative activities like the illegal mining as compared to hunt. So very few people are really bringing even the meat for the women to sell. Another key factor is the increasing urbanization and urban sprawl is one of the major factors. And the construction of buildings and putting up buildings and structures, you know, destroying the whole environment. And is in fact, this is one of the key factors. And once we are pulling the vegetation and pulling all these greens and putting up structures, it's definitely going to affect the animals that you find there originally. The increasing economic challenges because of the very few meat that is, or animals that is being now sold to the women, the meat itself is becoming very, very expensive. It's becoming an expense. So people would prefer to go for alternative sources of meat. So there's a general decline in the quantity of meat purchased and a general decline even in the livelihood. Many women have stopped even selling the meat and moved on into other alternatives because the meat itself is very, very expensive. The economic challenges, people have, the purchasing power is gone down and so on and so forth. So a very complex, factors, not only the COVID, but very other factors also impacting on the trade. Of course, income levels and profits, like I said, being affected. 87% reported reduced income, 91% indicated decreased profit margins. So for instance, this woman said before the COVID, she could purchase about 20,000, 20,000 is about maybe 1,500 US dollars now. But now she can only purchase between 4,000 and 5,000, which is less than 500, USD. So clearly, COVID has impacted on the business, but also other factors are also impacting on the business. And then in turn, the income levels, profit margins, and so on and so forth. So it's impacted negatively on an investment. One of the key things that the women mentioned, we have this traditional form of savings where what we call the susu savings, the women have the ability to save on daily basis, because these are women in the market space and they have the ability, and that's a major form of investment for them. But many reported that they can no longer do that. And those who have the ability to do have even reduced the amount of money that they save even on daily, and they even mentioned that they even cannot do that on daily basis. And that has also impacted on their ability to repay their loans. Some go for loans to invest in the trade, and that has impacted on their business. So they can't repay. Some have stopped selling the bushmeat completely, moved into other alternative businesses because you need some form of capital to be able to do that. And because they've lost all their capital base, they have to move into other businesses. Of course, all of these impacts the household budget, so inability to pay fees, utilities, and so on and so forth. Many said they've spent all their savings and they are now starting all over again. So I think I will end here, and then my colleague, Dr. Fidelia, will continue with the effects on the mental and physical health. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you very much. So I will continue with the impact on the health of the women. As Charlotte mentioned, we had a survey and qualitative data, FGDs and IDIs as well. So from the survey, only 10% mentioned that they had physical health problems like breathing and coughing. We can see that when it comes to mental health, 52% said it was fair. And some of the mental health issues were sleepless nights. So we will show with some of the qualitative data. And there were opposing questions such as what COVID, how COVID impacted on them. So we have a statement like it strengthened my faith in God or weakened my faith in God. So there were a lot of positives from that. So from the survey and the qualitative data that we had, some of the impact on their health
were sleepless nights. People couldn't sleep because of the loans and their inability to support their families. We asked them about their health during the COVID and now, and they thought that now overall their health has improved. And we had 61% who indicated that overall their health hasn't improved, sorry. And then 13% said it is worse, and 26% said their overall health was better compared to COVID. So from the qualitative, we have statements that show that some of them had blood pressure, which previously they didn't have. Some of them also developed anxiety issues. So one woman said, of course, as a single parent with no vibrant market, and in addition to having 5 kids and 5 other grandchildren, makes me worry a lot. But it's quite manageable now. And some also developed fear and worry, and the sleep also comes in again. So somebody says that the disease gives me sleepless nights because I had gone for a loan and the COVID came in, and it was very difficult for me, and I couldn't sleep at all because I was thinking of how I can pay off my debt. It wasn't easy at all. And we should say that actually some of them broke down, when they were recounting the effect of the COVID on them because of the debts that they had incurred. At Kumasi, there was one woman who was arrested by the police because she couldn't pay her debts, and she cried, like literally, throughout the interviews. So this picture here is a picture from Atrimunum from Kumasi. So you see the bushmeat, the wild animals. So it's sold fresh. And at the end of the day, if the ones that are not sold are kept in deep freezers. So during the COVID, when they were not coming to the markets, the meats were left in the freezers. And they were saying that the longer you keep it refrigerated, it becomes soft, and then it loses the taste. So the meat lost its value. And in Ghana, we also have like unstable power. So the power will go off, the meat will melt and then freeze again. So you have all these issues. So all of them contributed to the sleepless nights and the worry and all that. Some even thought that they were being bewitched. For Ghana, like people blame everything, unexplainable things on witchcraft. So if you wake up in the morning and you have headache and you don't know where it's coming from, then you have to blame somebody. So she says, now I am not afraid. She used to ask myself if somebody was responsible for what was happening to me. So she's never experienced anything like that. So this is buipe, and buipe, the meat is sold smoked. So these are pictures of the women selling at the buipe market. Right. One other objective of the study, we wanted to find out the risk perception of the women, whether they thought the bushmeat harbored zoonotic diseases, because they were saying people stopped buying because they thought that there was disease in the meat. So most of the women didn't think that the animals could harbor any disease. So during the FGDs in Kumasi, this woman says we eat the bushmeat more than anyone. Those of us who sell it eat it more than anyone else. Those coming to buy, those doing whatever, we eat it more than anyone. We also handle the meat more than anyone. Yet none of us has contracted any disease from the meat before. So as my colleague said, these women have been around the bushmeat trade, since infancy. It's been in the families, and their argument is that their grandmothers didn't get sick, their mothers didn't get sick, they eat, they are not sick, their children are eating, they are not getting sick. So they don't believe that there are any diseases in the bushmeat. So the coping strategies of the women during the COVID pandemic, we wanted to know how they coped, and then post pandemic. So during the pandemic, we realized that most of them had spent all their savings. They also spent their capital, or their capitals were actually wiped out because the meat got spoiled. So we should say that maybe Kofi will come in and he knows the names of the animals, but the smallest animal, the rest, that was the scientific name.
Also,
The
these,
cane
yeah,
rats.
cane rats.
Yeah. So the cane rat is the smallest of the animals, and the common of the animals that are sold. And one of them costs between 400 to 600 Ghana cedis. So that would be like 100.
No, 400.
400 cedis. How
At
much?
least now, let's say 30.
30 to 40
USD, yeah.
USD per one small cane rat, and you have like a freezer full of animals, including the ducats, big animals, and that literally is their capital, So when the animals and the carcasses got spoiled in the freezer, what it meant was that their whole capital was wiped off. They lost everything. So they had reduced purchases, some borrowed money, some started selling other goods. There were some women who started cooking kenke, which is a popular Ghanaian meal, or frying yam chips, or selling polythene bags. Some went into farming just to get by during the COVID. Post-COVID, they said they are trying to address the issue of the stigmatization, especially with the women at Achimunu in Kumasi. They are very aggressive. So they went to the radio stations, to try and tell the people that the bushmeat was safe to consume. So people should come to buy. So that's how they tried to sensitize the people to come and buy. Some also tried selling other types of meat. So at Techiman and Buipe, where they trade in smoked meat, they started selling in other smoked meat other than the bushmeat. So the bushmeat are animals in the wild, which are smoked. But there are domestic animals like beef and goats and guinea fowl that are smoked. So they started selling in other smoked meat to try and raise capital to get back into the bushmeat trade. And others also relied on their social capital to get by. So what happens at the market is that if you don't have money to purchase the goods, you take it on credit from the wholesalers, you sell, get money, you take your little profit that you have, and then give the money back. So that is how they coped post pandemic, and that is how many of them are doing to try and raise capital to get back in the trade. So we were looking at the support system from the government, from NGOs and other places, but they said they got none. No support from the government. In fact, during the COVID, the government of Ghana instituted a program to help small scale and medium scale businesses to get back on track. But these women didn't receive any help from the government. Only about one or two at Techiman received money from their member of parliament, but largely they didn't receive any help from the government. So looking at the data, we are still analyzing the data. The ethnographic study is still ongoing. It will end soon. But having gone through the data, these are some of the themes and the emerging issues which we will interrogate further. So we want to interrogate intergenerational transfer of resources within the bushmeat, because we realized that it was difficult for outsiders to get into the business. If your mother or grandmother doesn't, hand over the business to you as an outsider, it's very difficult. So we want to interrogate that. And then we also want to interrogate what we have termed informal trading associations and whether those could become formal. These are women in the informal sector, and yet they have to be licensed by the government before they can sell. So the hunters must be licensed, the traders must be licensed. If you are transporting the carcasses from the bush to the market, it has to be covered by some sort of license. And yet they are not within the formal space. They don't receive any support. So they have like loose associations, like the women in Kumasi who could march to the radio stations and warn the presenters, to stop speaking ill about their businesses. And then we also hope to further interrogate the stigmatization of the bushmeat, and then the relevance of trust in recovery and building of resilience. So this is, do we have more slides? Okay. Yeah, so our concluding thoughts. So there is declining of the bushmeat, as my colleague has already alluded to, due to climate change, loss of land, urban encroachment, and the use of agrochemicals in the forests where the animals are. Access to credits is still a challenge for them because the banks would not come in to support, such a business. And then we also realize that they have inadequate social protection, no help from anybody. And then Dr. Dame will talk about the policy later. But we view that when governments are instituting policy to help people during emergencies, they have to adopt an intersectional approach so that people from different categories can be captured. Thank you.
So I think very quickly, my colleagues have set the stage for the research methodology and what we seek to achieve as a group. So what are the policy lacunae that we realize? First of all, generally we realize that there's a policy incoherence across board, across the major sections of what it is, because the interesting thing that is a trade that has transcended from the agricultural revolution to the industrial revolution, computer revolution, and into the current Internet of Things. But it seems to have been lost on the radar in terms of policy coherence. So first of all, as was alluded to by the two presenters before me, the groups are loosely organized. And it will interest you to know that as part of COVID, we had a COVID-19 alleviation program, and we were not recognized as one of the groupings that ought to be taken care of. The other gap was the inadequate standard sets in the bushmeat trade, right from transporting the meat, hunting practices, storage, etc. It will interest you to know that there are quite clear veterinary principles around sheep goods in the marketplace, but this has been lost off the radar in terms of the standard setting for the bushmeat trade. And there's quite a gap. It's done, but not in a very clear way and not very standardized. I think it's also been alluded to that profits of the women in the bushmeat trade really dwindled during the COVID-19 pandemic. And there's also huge price variation across board due to inappropriate regulatory systems that cut across. This has been alluded to the stock of the bushmeat that dwindled. And there's this ban on bushmeat between August to December. And this has a huge impact on their livelihoods, incomes and livelihoods. Because they are not supposed to go out into the forest around this time. But for 4 months, how are these people going to survive? And what alternative livelihoods are we put in place for them? And the gaps in veterinary, especially the meats, right from the first point to where we may sell the diseased animals. Some species have been linked to zoonotic conditions like Ebola and COVID-19. That was also a clear gap that we recognize, in addition to the health and mental health challenges. So what are the policy proposals? As I alluded to in the beginning, there's a Ghana COVID-19 alleviation and revitalization of enterprises support, what is termed the Obatampa program in Ghanaian local parlance. And as part of it, we are calling for a review for these groups to be recognized in this document, and not just in this document, but going forward in all documents that looks at different groupings in the country. The other main proposal for this project is to set up the National Association of All Women in the Bushmeat Trade, of which the process has already begun. The bushmeat traders themselves called for the association, and initial names have been collected in terms of the executives. And we're in the process of putting it together for a national launch. And after that, provide secretarial support to that group. It will better engage governments with policy proposals in this industry. We're also calling for local production of bushmeat by animal farmers as a source of alternative livelihood, especially looking at the close season and what will happen to them during that season. There are a few issues that have been raised. People claim that the bushmeat that is handled, reared at home, doesn't taste the same way as the one in the forest. So what we do, we need to do more research into seeing how best we can look at the feeding practices to see how the taste can be similar. We need to set up a proper system to also monitor the number of animals killed by each hunter The license mandates them to kill a certain set of animals, but who is really there to ensure that it's that? And this is what I terms of the policy inconsistencies that I mentioned earlier on. And then we need the systems in place to deal with the health and mental health challenges. For most of our health sector policies don't really look at the health impact of most of these people, the bushmeat trade. And we need to reconcile a lot of our health policy proposals with this trade and see how we close the gaps. One of the things we're calling for is for the Forestry Commission to also be strengthened to better protect our forest reserves. There is a growing incidence of what we term in our local parlance galamsey, that's small scale mining. And most of the things they do tend to drive the bushmeat away. In fact, in one instance, I remember one of the hunters said in his grandfather's generation, he used to kill one bushback every week. Today, the whole year, people go and not even have one bushback. So clearly, most of the animals seem to have been driven. So we may need to work academia and all to really look at some of the practices in terms of the hunting practices. And even the period they call the close season, do we still maintain a 4 months or has it changed? Because it's been a while. So these are all things that we call on research to look at as we move forward. Thank you.
So just to bring our presentations to an end, as an overarching theme that I would like to leave with you is the fact that we are doing some practical interventions. As we said, in fact, at the end of our project, we hope to establish a national women bushmeat trading association right across the country. In fact, we have already collected names from all the regions. That is a really one practical thing that we can live with the country. So that is being done. There are some facilities in the market that are not in good shape. We want to renovate it in terms of water access and things like that. But some of the ovens that they used to smoke it, we have to upgrade it a little bit. So there are really practical aspects that we would like to live with the women so that it will have a sustainable, long-lasting impact even after the project. So these are some of the things. So I will use this opportunity to thank you all for coming. It's obviously very, very rich work, and the presenters, you have 1 or 2 questions, you will take it, and then that will be the end.
Well, I'd like to thank you for this important and very interesting research that you did. But I'd like to find out how you respond to critics who say, this is good. The decline in the bushmeat industry is good. Because in the past 2 decades, most of the zoonotic diseases from SARS to COVID has been linked some way, somehow to animals, especially that people consume. The chain of transmission from humans to animals or from animals to humans. You go through Pearson Airport now, you bring in food, they take it away and put it in a garbage. Then they ask you, do you have any meat in your bag? And so part of the reason for that is they are trying to ensure that the transboundary movement of these diseases are kept. So let's say I'm a Western critic and I'm saying, you know what, if it is declining, that's good. You know, how do you respond to that?
I am an ecologist and a geologist, so I do a lot of the direct observation of the bushmeat market centers itself, and I do a lot of ecology with some of these species as well. An interesting question there, and this came up a lot during Ebola and even COVID came up again. The problem is, you know, and in addition to the dwindling stock and people think it being a good thing, people have also called for bans of some of these, trading some of these species. For things like bans, you know, banning bushmeat because of its importance to people's livelihood, it is likely to drive the trade underground, where it becomes very difficult to regulate, and then in fact you might actually get the opposite effect of what you're trying to do by blocking the trade of the species. And in terms of the dwindling stock, again, we are talking about livelihoods here. Unfortunately, in our presentation, we don't show exactly the quantification in terms of monetary benefits, what this trade does to people's livelihoods. And if you've been to the markets and you realize that a lot of these women are the caretakers for their families, you know, to pay their kids' school fees and things like that from this. So if you say it's a good thing, and so, you know, the species dwindling is a good thing, there are a lot of implications. One, you're affecting people's livelihoods.
So I didn't say the species dwindling because that would be against conservation. I'm talking about the trade going down.
Okay, okay. The trade going down
Yeah.
is mostly due to, you know, dwindling stock and then some of these problems. So I think, yeah. I
But
think-
he is saying that the trade going down is a good idea.
Oh,
I'm
okay.
saying, I'm just playing the devil's advocate.
Yeah.
Of course, it's antibiotics free, so I like it.
Yeah, yeah.
But-
Yeah, but you can also take it from the
Yeah.
standpoint that even in the West,
Mhm.
basically you consume animals
Mhm.
and they all cause diseases. Okay, so you have to take it from there. It's not only those ones that can cause diseases. Here it causes diseases. So we are thinking about, if you heard about the idea of providing alternatives, the idea of health, licensing, watching it out, managing it. But you can't stop human being from eating animal, it could be bush or whatever. Everybody is. Okay, so if you're gonna say it's good that we stop there, then you have to provide alternative or tell me that you don't eat animals here. Okay, so these are some of the dramatic things you have to keep in mind.
So, yeah, it's okay. So alternative
Um,
livelihood.
I have a question for Dr. Odame. I hope I say your name.
Yes.
You were, at the beginning of your presentation, you were describing this kind of metamorphosis of the industry, talking about it moving from cultural evolution to industrial evolution. I think I missed, you had another.
Oh, okay, okay, two more. So actually, I was making a point that this is an industry that has moved from all the four revolutions the world has seen.
Yes,
Agricultural revolution, the industrial revolution,
yes,
the computer revolution,
yes,
and currently the Internet of Things revolution.
right. I mean, I think it's a fascinating point you're making, and I'm curious around what become those key indicators for when the industry sort of moves into these various phases. I think it's more of just a conceptual kind of question I'm asking. Because I'm interested in how this plays out in other aspects of our sort of cultural fabric, right? I'm particularly interested in, you know, traditionalism, traditional music, that whole area of our understanding of ourselves as Ghanaian people, mind you, African people, Afro-descendant people, when we talk about those who have migrated off the continent. And so I'm just interested in how do we sort of measure those moments in these cultural or these artifacts of our evolution, right? Like how do we measure those things? And are the measurements always external to us in Africa or us in Ghana? Like, are we always using that as a barometer for measurement?
I think maybe let me start from here. What I realized from the agricultural revolution was that it was more definite. It was more of cause and effect. So if A happened, B was the effect. Then we started moving more into more of a scenario planning phase.
Right.
Where it was more like, if it's A or B, we can go this way or that way.
Okay.
Like the current revolution, we find ourselves more in a phase where it's very unpredictable. It's what we call unknown unknowns. And COVID taught us that lesson. You don't even know what will happen, so you know how to respond to it. You got what I mean? So
The people, so why don't we keep those online and then we can formally close it and then we can hang on to anybody who wants. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, thank you, sir.
So if there are any questions
So-
from our
Yeah,
online
just one, and then
community.
you close it here so that people
Hi,
can-
I can see one on my chat from Rosemary, and the question is there a reason why there is a ban on meat from August to December? Great submission from you all, and I learned a lot.
Okay, from August.
Yes, so the idea of this ban was, you know, to set a period where the animals will basically give them a breather so they can reproduce. It was set up quite a very long time ago. I think at the inception of the legal instrument that regulates the hunting and trade of bushmeat in 1971 or so. So one of the things we are suggesting is that it is possible that, you know, it's not really efficient because we visit the markets and even during the open season where people are allowed to hunt, we still detect pregnancies in some of these animals and some of them are even lactating. So it's one of the things that we are trying to focus on now to see if we can, dive into it and see whether we can make suggestions so that the ban period can then be shifted to actually protect the animals as they are trying to do. But it's something that we are currently looking into.
Yeah, on behalf of everybody, Sylvia, thank you for putting this together, and sociology department. Thank you for hosting us, and it has been a pleasure. We have a lot of people online, and there are some Ghanaian diasporic community who want to just chat with these people. So we're gonna say the formal things, and then of course we are close. And from now, anybody can just chip in at any time without any formality.
Okay.
Thank you all for coming, both online and in person. Thank you.